Affairs don't begin in the bedroom. They begin in childhood. In the part of you that decided she needed to bury her truth just to be loved. The part that's now screaming to be seen. I'm Alex Croxford, and this is the Deeper Love podcast, where we name the shame, face the guilt, and help you find your way back to yourself. So let's begin. I wanted to record an episode about New Year's in the midst of an affair reveal, because I remember two very clear New Year's Eve parties that I was right in the middle of this mess. And I know that this is going to be released just before New Year's Eve. And so I wanted to share my experience to really normalize where you are right now, and that you're not wrong and that you're not broken. It's just really freaking hard. And remember one particular New Year's Eve, I will take you back there. This was before I had told my then husband. I was carrying this weight, this secret, and it felt so dense and heavy. And I remember just being sat at the table looking around. At that point were my absolute best friends that were also his best friends. And we'd all hired a cottage in the countryside in England for New Year's, which is what we did for quite a few years, actually. We loved it. We would absolutely party like there's no tomorrow. And I remember being sat around this table with all of my best friends thinking, you know nothing about me anymore. You don't know who I am. You don't know what I've done. I couldn't enjoy the games we were playing. It was just like I was there, but I wasn't. I was so far away from there. And let's turn this light down a bit. And, you know, I did what I always did, which was drink through the problem. Just got more and more drunk. Pretended I was happy, pretended I was feeling good. We were also going through IVF at the time. And I remember getting my period over the New Year's Eve party, and I just remember sitting in the bathroom just feeling like, what the hell has my world come to? What am I doing? What is happening? How am I ever going to get out of this mess? How am I ever going to tell my then husband? How am I going to recover? I just could not see how I was going to get through this. But then, you know, I'd come back downstairs again and the music's playing and everyone's laughing and, you know, handing around drinks and party poppers, and I would just have to slap that smile back on my face and carry on drinking, laughing, having banter, people counting down. And I got so drunk that I didn't have to really think about it anymore. But I remember just not being excited to see the new year in. It didn't feel exciting to me. In fact, I dreaded it. I felt nauseous at the thought of what was coming. And I didn't have anyone to talk to about it. I mean, there was a couple of people, but I didn't really. So I just had to just swallow it and get on with it, to be honest. And then another year passed, and in that year I had decided to tell him. And of course, that was horrific. It was also the year of COVID, which was horrific in its own way. But I remember we had decided rather naughtily to go to a friend's house for that New Year's. And so we'd spent about 6 months trying to work on our marriage by that point. And I'd just moved back in. You might remember that from the last episode. And I remember we went to one of his friends' houses, and there was about 8 of us. And again, actually, I might not have drunk at that party. I feel like at that point I was trying to stay sober because my emotions were so big and raw, and the thought of having a hangover was just like, no thanks. But I still remember just feeling so disconnected and so alone. And I remember being in the kitchen and looking for him, thinking, I just want him to look for me. I just want him to come to me. And he didn't. He just couldn't. And no one at that party knew the truth of what was going on. It was just us. And it was just, again, just incredibly isolating and lonely. And I couldn't really get into it. I couldn't enjoy myself. I couldn't let go. Because the whole time I just had this desperate well of sadness and fear and confusion and lostness inside of me. And I didn't know how I was ever going to get out of it, to be honest. I was always the fun one. I was the party girl. I was the one that was guaranteed to not want to go home. I never wanted the party to end. And now I was suddenly the girl that wasn't drinking, that was just sad, so freaking sad, so drained. And no one could rely on me for being the party girl anymore. I felt completely drained, completely empty. And, you know, the space between us at that point was just so heavy, just felt, it felt a mixture of maybe still we might make our way through this, but also just completely insurmountable. It felt like an absolutely enormous mountain to climb, and I had no idea how we were going to do it. I had no idea how we were going to get through it. But, you know, it wasn't long before I had to really face the truth, which was that this isn't getting any better. And although I was wishing and hoping and absolutely desperate for this man to fall in love with me again, I could see it was never going to happen. We were just drifting further and further apart. But that New Year's, the New Year's before our marriage finally ended, there was zero hope. Like, there was no hope, really. Well, maybe a tiny bit. But after your husband tells you that he doesn't love you and you've just moved back into the house, it's a pretty hard pill to swallow. But I didn't really feel excited about the new year. I didn't really want to celebrate the new year coming in. I didn't want to be like, yeah, it's 2021. Like, I was just like, oh God, how am I going to get through this? I just had nothing more to give. I just felt spent. And, you know, yet we still kept going. We still kept trying. We kept trying to make it work. We still lived under the same roof. We were back sharing a bed, and I can tell you now that was so freaking uncomfortable. It just got to about 2 months into that year, and I realised this was a hard no. It just wasn't. It was like we were getting into bed. It was like getting into bed made of glass, like broken glass or eggshells. And you just didn't know what was going to happen, who was going to be triggered. Now it was like we were trying to start this new relationship, but as total strangers. He'd developed his night routine since I'd moved out and moved back in. And now I didn't really fit into it. And instead it felt like I was just sliding into bed next to a block of ice. And I was so scared of someone triggering someone, and I was so scared of saying the wrong thing. And it was almost easier to just keep my mouth shut, like just be silent, just like don't have a conversation. And it just got more and more unbearable as the months went on. And after about 2 months, I reckon, I realized I just couldn't sleep in the same bed. Like my nervous system could not relax. And so, with the help of my coach, I plucked up the courage to, probably for the first time in my life, actually like ask for what I needed, which was space and to sleep in the spare room. And that felt really terrifying. She literally had to help me write it out because I didn't know how to ask for this need to be met. I didn't know how to ask for any needs to be met. I didn't even know I could have needs. So I was, yeah, terrified. And actually, when I did ask for that need to be met, he completely agreed with me. And so it must have been in about the February, I moved down to the spare room, and I'd had all my clothes still up in our shared bedroom. And then a couple of months, maybe actually a month later, yeah, it must have been a month later, I was like, no, I need to move all my clothes downstairs too. I'm not doing this anymore. It's getting harder and harder. And I just wanted my own space. I wanted my own sanctuary. I wanted my own room where I could do yoga in private, where he wasn't going to come into the room and like his energy was going to trigger something in me, or my energy was going to trigger something in him. I just wanted to have my space. I wanted to have my clothes. I wanted to have my yoga mat and be in my own energy, my own room. And again, he agreed. He thought that was a good idea. So I moved all my clothes down and started, living more like housemates. But at the same time, we were still both working from home because of COVID. And it was like living in an ice cube. There was very little joy, very little, yeah, happiness. It was just almost like, I was so tense, like I can feel it in my body, like so tense. If he was going to come upstairs and we were going to have a conversation, or like even simple conversations about food orders or meals, and just, it was just, the distance between us was just too uncomfortable to keep ignoring. And I knew that really, by the time I'd moved everything down into the spare room, I pretty much knew that everything or something had ended. Even if I didn't know what it was yet, like I really thought, how the fuck are we going to come back from this? I just couldn't see how we were going to recover. And, I remember sitting on the yoga mat in that room, just sobbing, like howling with tears. I've never cried like that in my life. And he would do his best to try and comfort me, but he just couldn't. He couldn't. He was in his own process. And to be honest, no one could comfort me in that moment. I thought he was going to somehow be able to rescue me from my pain, but he couldn't. I was just so sad. I felt every ounce of sadness I've never felt in my life before in that year, without a doubt. And moving back into the house, I really thought that this was going to be, the making of us, and it was the opposite. And I really thought at that point, I thought that was my rock bottom. I thought that my life was over. I thought I had ruined everything, that I am a terrible person. How could I do this? No one is ever going to love me. But I can see clearly now that I had to get to that. It had to get that bad so that I finally sat up and listened and was willing to trust something bigger than what I could see to support me. And I still didn't know what the hell I was doing. I just kept thinking to myself, my God, there has to be a reason why I'm going through this. Oh my God, this is so bad. This is so dark. Like, please tell me there's something more on the other side of this. But I think what had really happened when I look back is that the pretense that our marriage had been built on, and I don't say that to diminish our relationship or our love or our marriage, because I really loved that man as much as I was able to love and receive love at that point. I really loved him and I wanted to be with him. But I think when I look back now, I can see that the pretense, it was no longer viable. And everything that we had built that relationship on, which was fun and play and laughter and going to festivals and raves and hanging out with our friends and having banter and all of like the fun and the frivolity. Now shit had got real, not only with going through the infertility process, but also having told him about the fact that I had cheated on him, and the foundations of that relationship were just not strong enough to be able to sustain that kind of trauma. And up until that point, we'd kind of managed to, not pretend, because I think that does diminish the experience that we had, and it wasn't pretense. But the masks that I had been wearing, I will talk about that. The mask that I had been wearing of perfectionist, who was not vulnerable, who was the strong one, who didn't need anyone, who was the go-getter, high achiever, that mask was slipping. I mean, maybe slipping's an under estimation. What's the word? You know what I mean. But it fell off, like well and truly fell off. I couldn't even pretend to be the strong one anymore. I had nothing left. There was no fuel in the tank to keep that mask on. And when the mask fell off and there was just this desperately needy child underneath, one that was terrified of someone abandoning her and terrified that no one could meet her needs and terrified of being too much and at the same time not enough. So much emotion, so much collapse. And it was like we were just two puddles on the floor. There was no containment. There was no way that we were going to be able to muddle through the puddle. And I had no idea what my future looked like. The more I realized that this marriage was built on not necessarily truth, but it was built on truth, but I wasn't being true to who I was, not on purpose, but I just wasn't. I didn't know who I was. And so now I was starting this journey back to myself. I'd been working with a therapist and a coach and somatic practitioners and acupuncturists and other energy healers, you name it, I'd been doing it. I realized that I had to take a risk and I had to make a decision whether or not to stay and hope that this man was going to fall in love with me again, or that I jump off the edge of the cliff into the abyss of the unknown and trust and surrender that there is a reason why I had to go through this. There was a bigger plan, a bigger picture for me. And actually, I would say that that part of my awakening, that beginning to trust in something bigger, was one of the most profound parts of this whole experience. And before that point, I was little Miss Atheist. I didn't believe in anything beyond what I could see. But the more I was doing this work, the more I was healing, the more I was stripping back layers and seeing and having proof in my own life of actually something much more than we can see existing, I had that to lean back on. It was like it enabled me to trust and surrender and to take a step that felt like terrifying, but also, if I can take the step off this cliff and I just trust that whatever's going to happen next is exactly what's meant to happen, then I'll do it. And I had no idea what was coming next. If you've already heard the Year of the Clusterfuck episode, then that's what came next, which was, more pain, more surprise, more, are you kidding me? But I needed to go through all of it. It was like an initiation. It wasn't even like an initiation. It was an initiation. And, the prize at the end of that initiation, and from all of the hard work and all of the healing and all of the commitment, I was so committed to myself. I was so committed to healing from this. I was not prepared ever to do this again. I was not prepared to walk away from this without having something to show for it in some way. Like, I knew this had to be a lesson, a huge lesson in my life. And if I hadn't have been through that, if I hadn't have been through the year after, if I hadn't have been through all of the pain that I had, then I wouldn't be here now. I wouldn't be here now doing this. I wouldn't have left my career in TV. I wouldn't have met Adam. I wouldn't be on an entirely new journey. I wouldn't have made the new friendships that I've made. I wouldn't be as connected to people as I am. I wouldn't be experiencing the love as deep as I am right now. I wouldn't have any trust in anything bigger. I would be terrified of the future, and I'm actually not. And there is a difference between resignation and surrender. And resignation is, well, this is just it then. This is life. This is what I just have to deal with. This is what I have to go through. This is how I'm going to feel forever. And that, the difference between that and surrender is I trust that there is something bigger holding me. And I don't have to control my life. I don't have to live my life from fear. I don't have to try and plan every moment out in the future. You've got no idea what's going to happen in the future. Control is a myth, guys. It's a freaking myth. We have no idea what's going to happen. And the more that we try and grip on and we try and figure it out, the more we block ourselves from actually the most magical opportunities that probably would come through. And so if you are stood right now in the emptiness and you are dreading New Year's and you are dreading the next 365 days of 2026, perhaps you're hoping that time is going to make this all go away, or you're going to be able to forget about something, or perhaps you are just feeling like you are looking down the barrel at another year of pain and misery. I want you to know that I see you in that and I get it. And perhaps this is going to be the moment, especially after Christmas and the blehness of having to go through this in the aftermath, that maybe you're realizing that it's impossible to do this alone. You can't keep going like this. And it doesn't mean that you're broken. It doesn't mean that something is wrong with you. It just means that something real is beginning to bubble up to the surface. And this is why I've created the sanctuary for this very moment, because you don't need to pretend in there. You just need somewhere to land. You need somewhere where you don't have to explain yourself, where you don't have to perform, where you don't have to know what comes next. Because it might feel like right now that you are looking at the end of your life. But actually, what that New Year's meant to me wasn't that the end of my life. It was the end of who I was pretending to be. And that mattered way more than I knew at the time. So if you are ready to take that step into a space where you can be you can be accepted, and you can begin your journey of coming back to yourself, one steady step at a time, then you can find the link for the sanctuary in the show notes. I'll see you next time. Thank you for listening to the Deeper Love podcast. If today's episode spoke to you, hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And if you're ready to go deeper, you'll find all the ways to work with me in the show notes. Until next time.